We have a new president in the United States, and he's conducting a revolution within the United States that has been overwhelmingly successful. He has control of the Senate. He has control of the House. He's got a majority vote. Therefore, this is the will of the American people. The media may not want to admit that, but Romania must now deal with the United States that is different than it was before. The difference can be most clearly seen in the statement by Trump, which is that the Ukrainian war is a European war. By that, he does not mean the United States does not have an interest. He says, basically, we have an interest. If Russia manages to move through Ukraine into Europe, it is a disaster for Europe. It is an unpleasant reality for the United States. But the tendency of the Europeans is to shift responsibility to the United States, the burden to the United States to deal with it, by pretending that they are not facing a disaster. So the Americans see the Europeans as creating realities that are beneficial to them and put the United States at risk. It is certainly important to the United States that the Russians not come through. But in the end, the question is, what is the relationship between the United States and Europe? What are Europe's obligations to itself? What obligations do the Americans have to the Europeans? And so on. Trump's view of Europe is that it does not accept the principle that it is capable of taking responsibility for itself by itself. The American view is that this is a very useful position because it shifts the responsibility to the United States. The core of Trump's position is that the United States does not want this responsibility. Europe's GDP is substantial, about $17 trillion. The Americans about $2 trillion. The disparity that existed in 1950 is gone. He has said already many times at NATO meetings that the Europeans still don't grasp the fact that they have developed or don't want to grasp it and take responsibility. So in 1950, when we began NATO and all the other things, Europe was weak and unable to defend itself. It was essential to the United States that Europe not fall into Soviet hands. The United States bore the responsibility. History has changed, but the basic psychology of the relationship remains intact. And so the United States wants a very strong power in Europe. And they say that the Europeans don't want that. They would rather be weak. That forces the United States into taking action. This may be true. I don't think it is intentional on the part of Europe. These Europeans are not plotting against the United States. But Trump thinks that, and the American public thinks that. And that's where this problem begins. We have to be able to be aware of what the American public thinks. This is particularly true for Romania. Romania has had excellent relations with the military-industrial complex of the United States. They work well with them continually. Their power is now going to be redefined by a new presidency, and their ability to continue to function in a way that always assumes that alliance means American dependency is going to go away. Now, I think the effect this has on the European countries and your own is that you now have to shift to a different understanding of the world. You are now a sophisticated power. You're a country with substantial resources. Your forces have developed successfully. Now you must take the role in history. The problem of Europe, of course, is there's no such thing as Europe. It is a series of powers independently making their way, sometimes cooperating, sometimes not, sometimes cooperating on one set of issues, not on others. So when we saw the beginning of the Ukrainian war, and the United States essentially began shifting weapons, that's about all that they've done. We were looking at the Europeans, some of our closest allies, wondering what they were going to do. To go into a war, wondering what your allies are about to do, and having to have meetings with the allies, not from the war plan that had there, but the current situation, this is very difficult for the United States or for any country. Therefore, there now has to be a solid relationship with Europe for the United States to have a framework in which to operate with some sort of predictability, understanding what its allies are going to do automatically. In other words, the alliance has to change. The alliance has to change from the idea that the United States is the major power and the European powers are minor powers able to maneuver in directions they want. This is the American perception. And it's Trump's, and it's one of the reasons he won the election. So now we have to really restructure not so much the institutions, but the thinking behind the institutions. The old model will not work in the United States. Trump's election with overwhelming votes had many meanings. This is one of them. We are not going to have that. It was very trying in the time the Ukrainians were faced the enemy, not knowing what the Germans would really do, wondering what the French would do, which is always an interesting problem. But we can't have an American nation bound to uncertainty at the very moment when certainty is necessary. Romania is part of that. Romania is more powerful militarily than most countries. They've spent the money, but they still doesn't have a real understanding in this sense. War is an offensive problem. They have a defensive force. You lose on the defense eventually. But on the offense, you can have spoiling attacks. You can flank the enemy. You can put them in a position where they don't want to go to war. So developing a force that can do that very well is important. I don't know what the capabilities are of the Romanians. They keep it secret, and they should keep it secret. I don't need to know. But I do need to be sure that in the event of war, they're not going to sit waiting for the enemy to come with superb defenses, but go out, seek them out, break them down. This is from Trump's point of view, I think this is an alliance. This is a situation in which the United States has fundamental allies and really understand in an event of war or crisis what each party will do. When NATO was formed, we understood what they could do, but they couldn't do much. Now, this is different. So one of the things that Trump says is a wake-up call for Europe. Either make your accommodation with the Russians or shift painfully, because for many of the countries, it'll be very difficult politically and otherwise to take a more mature stance. But it is the country like Romania that is able to do this because it already has the military force. It has the relationship with the United States. It has all these things already in place. And they talk to the Americans. And I am certain, this I can be certain of, that you generals have had this conversation with you. And you want to do it, but you have a political problem, as all European countries have. And you have to solve it. And we can't stage a coup d'etat to impose it on you. You are independent states. You take the consequences. I urge you to rethink your defense posture. This is one of the things about what Trump said. He does not mean he will not participate in Ukraine. It does not mean he's not going to be concerned about Europe, but he wants proportionality. And so that's what we're driving for. I would finally like to make a point that's important. The Russians do not have a strong profile in the United States, its main market, yet its main partner. Yes, it has relations with apparatchiks, as we call them, uh, the people in the office and so on. But I go to many meetings and have many friends, and I have never heard anyone ask, what is the Romanian position on this? They speak of the Hungarian position, which I'm happy to give them. It is whatever it is, won't be that tomorrow, the Hungarian position. But it's very important to the Romanians to have a presence there because the people worked with during the prior culture are no longer in control. They are not the ones who are going to decide. Perhaps they will still decide what weapons to give, but not on strategy of how they do things. So it is important to understand that right now, as sometimes other times, the people you have to deal with are the American public. Donald Trump is president because he respected the American public, or at least pretended to. He was a person who listened to them, and he knew that his presidency depended on them. Now, the relationship between foreign countries and the United States has to take that into account. The president intends to be reelected. He's already thinking of it. The president knows that he has to be popular, and therefore the things that are happening have to shape the public. This was the case a while ago, but it's the case again. One military obligation is to build a relationship with the American public. You are not visible, and therefore we don't worry about you. We don't worry about your condition. The military does and so on, but if they lose control, well, so one of the things in the relationship that changes is how the United States works. And you must understand that difference. And there are ways in which foreign governments manipulate the United States all the time, but they have very sophisticated means. We are going to manipulate you and you're going to say thank you. That's the way they do it. The Romanians are an important country. It has taken seriously its position in Europe and militarily, and has built a solid military out of a relationship with the American military, with the defense community. Now it's different. Now it has to be a visibility within the United States so that the American public knows who you are at least and cares. That will make possible all sorts of flexibility. The stunning thing about Trump is now we're a democracy. We go to war when the American public wants it. So there's a big change in the United States. There is a change in its relationship to Europe and therefore to your country, but at the same time, it's manageable if it is faced that it's happened and actions are taken to shift on various fronts the Romanian position. I want to thank you for bearing with me and asking me to come. And from this point on, if there are any further questions, let me know. Thank you.